Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 17. Meekness is not weakness. Meek is a word that I tend to associate with the gentleness of the nativity scene at Christmas time, and one that I do not commonly use. Meek has many synonyms, including quiet, gentle, submissive, deferential, unassuming, mild, unresisting, respectful, and humble. These adjectives are generally thought of in the modern world to be representative of weakness of character, yet each of them describes an underlying quality of humility, being the quality of having a modest view of one's own importance. This quality of humility, from a spiritual perspective, is a key component of the changing mindset, and it follows naturally from acceptance and surrender. Humility arises from surrendering to our own inner selves with complete honesty. We see the flaws in our own makeup with total clarity. We see the mistakes that we've made by living in ego, and we begin to experience the spiritual power within. This combination of accepting and forgiving our own defects of character, together with our certain knowledge that we are spiritually pure and undamaged, provides firm ground on which to stand. There's no need to impress anybody because we know deep down who we are, warts and all. We are imperfect egos and perfect spirits, and we constantly alternate between the two, even after we become spiritually aware. We will never be fully perfect, and we know it. We therefore walk with humility, aware of our human nature, but also knowing the underlying truth of our ultimate perfection. I spent my whole life searching for meaning and fulfillment in all the usual ways, but ultimately none of them meant much at all. I overvalued money, status, relationships, popularity and power, and undervalued what was truly meaningful. I sought satisfaction through stimulation of the senses and chased happiness through trying to reach a stage in life when I could be proud of myself and take it easy. Despite acute and painful awareness of my fear and insecurities, my ego developed an outer shell of pride. I pushed myself to be who I thought I should be, and my pride drove me ever onwards. Every time I broke through a new fear barrier, my pride would notch up another level. Plaudits and positive feedback added more cement to the foundations, and financial success built an ugly construction of prideful achievement. I aspired to be an alpha male, yet in truth there was nothing really attractive or admirable about my pride and arrogance. Grandiosity was a cover for my inner despair, but I couldn't tell anyone. My pride was an impregnable fortress that could not be breached. My ego simply would not allow any sign of weakness, so I battled on for years, outwardly successful and happy, but inwardly frightened, lonely, and increasingly desperate. I pretended to be happy because I could not admit to myself that my pride was false. I was winning the rat race, but was still living like a rat. As you may imagine from the description above, humility was not in my vocabulary for many years. It was not relevant until I became spiritually aware, and then I was able to see the error of my ways. Having firstly to admit that I'd been chasing the wrong dream, and then secondly to face up to my own flawed humanity, was enough to bring me to my knees. My ego had been like a computer virus that had corrupted the operating system. My attitude toward life had been to see what I could get out of any situation rather than what I could give to it. This was a clear sign that I was operating from ego rather than spirit. I could now see the games that my ego had been playing, and I saw how relinquishing my ego was necessary in order to allow my spirit to shine. Stripping away ego did not mean destroying my personality, but it did mean right-sizing. I was able to do this through a 12-step recovery program that involved documenting my dysfunctional patterns of thinking and behaving. This was done through examination of my resentments, fears, intimate conduct, and harms done to others. Having done this work, I then appealed to the spirit within me to relieve me of these aspects of myself. There was little point in doing this unless I was fully willing to allow myself to change. We all have the gift of free will, and without willingness I would simply have changed my mind when it all got a bit uncomfortable. Interestingly, this process was far more effective than any of the therapy that I'd previously undertaken. Therapy sought to reveal to me why I behaved in a certain way, but it didn't fundamentally change anything. Trying to change through ego-driven willpower didn't work, but making a decision to allow spirit into my life did. This was the process that was suggested to me by like-minded and caring colleagues, and it was just the medicine I needed. Admitting my faults was understandably a very humbling experience, yet it did the trick. Instead of being ashamed to look at my own defects of character, I became willing to see them and accept them. Instead of denying them, I embraced them and allowed them to be. It was in allowing my defects to be real that I was then able to begin to change. My ego didn't like it at all, but my spirit woke up inside me and started to make itself known. What started as an embryonic notion gradually became a powerful force for change. I came to see that the solution to my problems was not yet more external recognition, achievement, or gratification, but simply a change in my own thinking and my concept of being. In spiritual terms, light means understanding, and the process of enlightenment literally means coming to understand. When we understand, we see the light. I used to be wary of people who had seen the light and were born again, but I now see that these are just overused terms that describe a profound experience. I also understand why people who do see the light become overbearingly enthusiastic about telling everyone about it. Well, this book is a case in point, but hopefully I'm not overdoing it too much. The process of accepting and surrendering to that which we really are is a humbling experience, which then gives us the precious gift of humility. I describe humility as a precious gift because in truth that is exactly what it is. There is an intangible quality to humility that is indeed precious. The ability to walk in peace and love and to inspire others to do the same is a mark of great humility. And there have been many admirable people in history who have displayed these characteristics. I used to marvel at such people and wonder how on earth they could achieve such influence and positive change in the world whilst remaining so understated. But now I think I understand. Each of them was in touch with the spirit within and was able to draw upon inner resources that are simply not available to the ego mind. I saw these people as charismatic without ever realizing that the word charisma means inspired, which in turn means with spirit. Inspiration is spirituality. And the Greek word entheos also means inspired and is the basis of our word enthusiasm. So motivation and willpower come from ego, whereas inspiration and enthusiasm come from spirit. There's a huge difference between drumming up the motivation to do something that we don't really want to do and having real enthusiasm to do something that we love. Spirituality gives us inspiration and enthusiasm for life. It's not possible to be truly spiritual without being fully humble. Humility is strength because it's fearless and knows no limitations. There's no end to the miracles that a humble person can perform, because once spirituality is experienced and accessed, then unknown talents and abilities rise up from within. Spirituality exerts power through example and acts like a magnet that attracts yet more love and creativity. We talk in 12-step recovery programs about a power greater than ourselves, and for me, that power is love. The amazing truth is that we all have access to a power greater than ourselves, and that power lies within each of us. All we have to do is get out of our own way and let it flow. In order to do this, we have to replace pride with humility. This may sound simple, but experience shows that it's far from easy. One of the many paradoxes of spirituality is that we receive so many gifts that we can quickly forget where they all came from. We enjoy life far more than before and feel so much better about ourselves that the idea of gratitude and humility can quickly fade. And before long, the old ego kicks back in and tries to take credit for all the good things that have now happened. We ironically become proud of our own spirituality, and before we know it, we're right back where we started and totally baffled by what's happened. We try to fight it, but the moment that we fight and resist, we've lost sight of our original surrender, and things get even worse. Eventually, perhaps after a long time, the pain will get so bad that we go back to square one and start again. This constant battle between ego and spirit will continue to cause us endless pain and suffering unless and until we do the sensible thing and take action to reinforce our spiritual condition. And we do this by maintaining daily practices that keep our humility intact and our ego at bay. We will cover such practices in part 4. The more we practice, the more we grow, and the more we grow, the less likely it is that the ego will be able to regain a foothold. Humble is a word that we can use to describe a newborn baby. This bundle of perfection doesn't need to do anything, think anything, say anything, or be anything other than exactly what it is. A baby establishes its worth simply by coming into existence and being. Babies are humility personified, and we love them for it. We see perfection and humility in babies because their egos have not yet formed. They delight in play and discovery, and are able to give and receive love unconditionally. We forget that we were all babies once, and that in many respects we still are. We accept that babies and children need love to grow and blossom, but at some point in our adult lives, we assume that this is no longer required. But we don't stop needing food, water and oxygen to survive and grow, but somewhere along the line it was deemed that we could do without love. Our experience of love changes from being unconditional to conditional, and we develop ways to protect ourselves. We seek love from others, and when it's withheld, we experience pain and suffering, which then teaches us to be more cautious. We seek worth through pleasing others or achieving goals, and we quickly forget that none of this was originally needed to justify our existence. The truth is that whether we are babies, children, teenagers, adults, or retirees, there's nothing that we have to do, think, achieve, or create in order to justify our worth. There's nothing that we need to be other than ourselves. Worth is eternal, and we get to choose whether to showcase it or to hide it. Talent and ability are not worthy qualities in themselves, but are simply expressions of worth. Skill is neither talent nor ability, but reflects focus and dedication. There's worth in every person, animal, plant, place and thing in the world, and we can choose to see it or ignore it. If we choose to ignore the worth in others, we're guilty of ignorance. Well, these appear to be strong words, but oftentimes the ego does not like the truth. And when our ego is dominant, we remain a long way from our true nature. When we're stuck in ego, our biggest fear is that we will become aware of our own spirituality. Ego resists humility, yet true humility is a wonderful thing to behold and experience. The purpose of life is a vexed question, but one potential aspect of the answer can be thought of as growing into our perfection. In order for us to grow towards perfection, we have to fully accept that we're not perfect as we are. And this is the basis of humility. We see that we've been living in fear, and we choose instead to live as love. We grow towards perfection by increasingly realizing, accepting, and surrendering to the spiritual perfection that resides within us. Spiritual practice brings about an integration of mind and spirit, and an alignment of thinking with our core instinct of love. The ego will not voluntarily diminish itself, but once we see the ego as the problem, we can begin to grow and change. The ego is cunning, baffling and powerful, and it will come up with endless new strategies to defend itself until something changes internally. The ego may help us to feel better in the short term, but it will never solve any problem permanently, because the ego is the problem. Life is perfect, but we create the problems. We are the problem. When two or more egos get together, the result is conflict and drama. We can even create conflict and drama in our own heads, all on our own, simply by thinking too much. For many of us, this story of conflict and drama is our primary identity. Deep down we may wish it were different, but our thinking and behaviour keep us stuck in the ego trap. There is a way out, but it requires acceptance, surrender, and humility. The trouble is that for most of us, humility will not come naturally unless it's forced upon us. And none of us like to be forced to do anything, because it's a violation of our free will. We may resist change even if, logically, it makes sense. Too much stick and not enough carrot will not move a stubborn donkey a single inch. The carrot is needed too, and it comes in the form of the many delights and advantages of humility. Our internal state of being directly creates our experience of life. If we're stressed, rushed, fearful, needy and uncomfortable inside, our lives will be exactly the same. If we're peaceful, serene, loving and content inside, that will be our experience externally too. Our awareness of spirituality prevents us from creating chaotic and stressful lives. Spiritual practice brings us happiness. This transformation does not necessarily come about through fundamental changes to what we do, but instead arises from changing our attitude towards how we do it. We may not be able to change the wind, but we can adjust our sails. Simple awareness and honest examination of our motives for doing what we do is enough to get the ball rolling. Spirituality through humility is not an optional component in a balanced, ego-driven lifestyle, but is fundamental to a whole new way of life. Spirituality is not about going to church on Sunday, singing a few hymns, confessing a few sins, and then carrying on with our mainly selfish lives. Living a spiritual life is about allowing our own spirit to determine every aspect of what we do. This may sound hypocritical given the way that I've behaved in the past, but I clearly see now the error of my ways. I would have behaved with far more love towards others had I known how to express it. I was trying to love from ego rather than allowing love to flow from spirit, and the two are simply not in the same league. Spirituality opens each of us up to give and receive unconditional love, and thereby create an abundance of joy. True humility means that we remain humble even when we begin to experience the powerful benefits of spirituality. My life is no more important or precious than anyone else's, but neither is it less so. I'm just one human being out of 7 or 8 billion others, and countless billions of insects, animals and plants. This is simply the way it is. Spending just a few minutes observing the natural world will teach me everything I need to know about self-importance. A mountain does not need to justify its own existence, and neither does a mouse. They both exist and quietly fulfill whatever purpose they have, and so it is with the rest of the natural world. We don't need to justify our existence either. We are human beings rather than human doings, and this basic truth can fundamentally change our perspective. My purpose in seeking growth towards perfection may be spiritually grand, but it does not need to be grandiose. The light of spirit within me will outshine any silly notions of grandiosity that I might have. I've no need to embellish the truth of who I am through temporary status or material possessions. Humility and a genuine desire to be of service to others are enough. I am simply part of all that is. Humility gives us the courage to remain calm in the face of trying circumstances. Love seems to create an invisible force field around us that shields us from all the ugliness and chaos in the world. It gives us the wisdom to know that reacting to any situation out of fear rather than love will surely make matters worse. When we react from ego, we provoke yet more ego. But when we react with love, we bring a calming and nourishing influence. we become the water that nourishes the souls of our fellow human beings. And just like water, we don't have to do anything other than just be available. Egos have been fighting with egos since the dawn of time, and we can choose whether to join in or adopt a different approach. Angry people do not make for a peaceful existence. Whether we initiate an attack or defend an attack from elsewhere, we are in both cases acting with aggression. Anybody who is truly spiritual and free of ego will not be able to even conceive of conflict, let alone engage in it. The humble person does not have enemies. There may be people trying to take advantage, but this can be handled with love rather than aggression. Behaving with humility does not mean we cannot say no in any given situation. Saying no is a perfectly spiritual and loving response, provided the motivation comes from intuition and inspiration rather than fear. If a circumstance calls for leadership, the humble way will not involve control or power, but instead will give gentle guidance and influence without any attachment to the outcome. It's not what we do that counts, but more that whatever we do, we do it with love. Actions taken from ego are selfish, whereas actions taken from love are spiritual. It's those who act with love who benefit the world. Another key aspect of humility is the acceptance of and surrender to the absolute certainty of death. We are frightened to death of dying, even though it's clearly part of the natural cycle. The planet would be very crowded by now if previous generations had not passed on. We will cover the eternal aspect of spirit later in the book, which is all good news, by the way. But for now, we're looking at death from the point of view of humility. Knowing that we're going to die keeps us humble. Our own feelings of grief and the reaction of others to the loss of loved ones influence our attitude to death and can be powerfully debilitating. We also fear the pain and suffering associated with death. When we do reluctantly think about dying, we privately hope the end will be swift and painless. The way of humility is to contemplate death from our new perspective of spirituality and allow ourselves to die to the concept of death. The humble person knows nothing real ever dies and that all will be recycled, including the spirit. The chemical, molecular and atomic content of a body and mind will be absorbed back into the earth or converted back into energy. The pure essence of spirit will persist beyond the temporary physical form that it previously manifested. Spirituality brings this wisdom home, and the fear of death evaporates like moisture on a sunny day. With humility, there's nothing to fear. The humble person does not need the world to be any different from the way it actually is. Like an ocean, there may be turmoil and strong winds on the surface, but deep down all is calm and peaceful. Whatever feelings we may experience, these are temporary and do not reach deep enough to disturb our spiritual selves. All is calm within, and so it will remain, provided we stay grounded in humility. Calmness of mind and inner peace go with the territory when we surrender to life and let things be. The humble person is neither beneath nor above anybody. The humble person is immune to criticism, but is equally unaffected by praise. People with humility appear courageous because they have no fear. They have nothing to fear, and there's nothing to disturb the certain knowledge that all is well. The spiritual objective is not to have the spotlight shine upon us and revel in the glory of fame and fortune. The spiritual way is to go quietly and allow the glorious light of spirit to shine from within. The universe will honour the modest and thwart the proud. This is the natural order of things. The notion that meekness is weakness is simply not true.